Okay, two big Cro-Magnon inventions. The bow and arrow, small stuff. The fish hook, small stuff. Two big inventions, major Cro-Magnon inventions, which are going to change everything. They're going to change everything. So much so that when we find these two inventions together in the prehistoric period, then we start talking about a new time period, the Neolithic period. Let me say that again. When we find these two inventions, which I haven't given you yet, I will in just a minute, together in the prehistoric period, then we start talking about the Neolithic period. The neo part of the word means new. You might have already known this. I know you know what the lith part of the word means. It comes from the Greek word lithos, which means a rock or a stone. I know you know that because I just gave it to you in the last section. The Neolithic period, the new rock or stone period. So sometimes you've already guessed the new Stone Age is called, the Neolithic period is called the new Stone Age. The tools are still made out of stone, but there's a significant difference in the culture. And there we go, my pointer didn't want to disappear. The tools are still made out of stone, but there are significant differences in the culture, and they're all the result of two big inventions. The first of these inventions, these big inventions, if we understand Cro-Magnon society, and I think here we're on pretty safe ground, then the first of these big inventions probably invented by a man, by which I mean a male person. Or at least it makes sense to kind of picture it that way, okay? Kind of play along, because it kind of makes sense to picture it that way anyway. Well, there's this guy, and one day he's out walking through the woods, he's hunting, and he comes across a wolf pup who's been abandoned by the mother for whatever reason. And so he chases down the wolf pup, picks the wolf pup up, and brings it back to the cave. Well, everybody in the cave says, "All right, wolf pup stew for dinner tonight." And the guy says, "Nope, nope, 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 nope. I got an idea. We're going to play a practical trick on the wolf pup. We're going to play a joke on the puppy. We're going to bring the puppy into the cave. We're going to raise him. And when he grows up, he'll think he's one of us. He'll think we're his family. See, he'll forget about his brothers and sisters in his litter. He'll forget about his mother. He'll think we're his family." And everybody says, "Well, it's a pretty elaborate prank to play on this poor little pup. Come on, let's wolf pup stew." And the guy says, "No, no, look. If he grows up and thinks he's one of us, he'll help us hunt. He'll chase down animals that we can't chase down, and because he thinks we're his family, he'll give us a share of the food." You've seen this on TV, right? In documentaries, one wolf chases down an animal, and if you're in the pack, well, then you get to come up and get a share of the food. Well, the guy says he'll think we're his pack. He'll share the food with us. And everybody says, "Oh, man, this is the nuttiest idea. Don't you know, every time some stranger walks past the cave, the little pup's going to start barking, wake us all up?" And the guy says, "That's kind of the idea. He'll think we're his family. He'll want to protect us." "Oh, man, don't you know that he's going to go to the bathroom in the cave?" Not that they had bathrooms in the cave, you know what I mean. And the guy says, "Well, yeah, at first, but we'll teach him to go outside. We teach the kids to go outside. We'll teach the pup to go outside. Just like you teach the kids. You rub their nose in it and say, 'Bad, bad, outside, outside.' And he'll learn. He'll think he's one of us." And everybody says, "Oh, man, this is a nutty idea. But after all, you know, we are Cro-Magnon people, and we do value inventiveness and creativity, so I guess we have to go along with it. But 3 weeks. If it doesn't work in 3 weeks, it's wolf pup stew." Well, 3 weeks go by, and you know the rest of the story. 3 weeks go by, and the pup is still going to the bathroom in the cave. But nobody's going to make wolf pup stew out of Rover, right? Because he's all fuzzy and furry, and he's got those big brown eyes, and he's everybody's best friend. And sometimes you just want to laugh just looking at him. He's so funny. And, well, somewhere along the line, somebody adopts somebody. And here we've got a big invention. Domesticated animals. You might recognize the domestic part of that word as having to do with the house or the home. Domesticated animals. That concept means bringing animals into the home or at least close to the home so that you can make use out of them. You can exploit them without having to chase them down through the woods. And the evidence that by far most Neolithic Cro-Magnon sites indicates that usually in most places the dog is the first of the domesticated animals. There's some scattered evidence elsewhere in a few places, but by far in most places where this invention comes around, the dog is the first of the domesticated animals. And, well, it worked really good with dogs. It worked really well with dogs. Now, if you don't know dogs, what I'm going to tell you sounds crazy, but if you know dogs, you know I'm telling you the truth. Dogs really do think they're one of us. They really do. They really do think that we're their family. They're just fuzzier and smaller and dumber. But they really do think they're one of us. And it doesn't bother them that they're dumb. They're pretty stupid, but it doesn't bother them. Maybe that's why I like dogs. They know they're stupid, but it doesn't bother them. You ever see a dog sitting around being depressed that he's so stupid? I'm so stupid. I do not know how to open a door. Human beings touch a door, it opens. I touch a door, it does not. I don't have any thumbs. No, the dog knows he's stupid, but he doesn't care that I'm stupid, but I'm happy. Yeah, it doesn't seem to bother them any, but they really do think they're one of us, and I am serious about this. Dogs will chase wolves away from human habitation. Given a choice of cooked meat or raw meat, wolves will go for the raw meat, because the cooked meat, well, who does that? Dogs will go for the cooked meat rather than the raw meat, because that's what humans eat. That's what they're used to eating, the leftover scraps of the cooked meat. And they'll chase wolves and coyotes away from human habitation. We pulled a big one on the dogs. They really do think they're one of us. And once this idea catches on, it catches on in a big way. You know, calves drink cow's milk. Maybe people can drink cow's milk. And then when the cow gets old and dies, you've got your steak right there in the backyard. Instead of chasing down these big birds that don't fly very far, instead of wandering through the woods, instead of wandering through the woods, climbing up in the trees, trying to get eggs out of the nests, let's chase down these big birds that don't fly very far away, and we'll feed them grain every day up next to the cave, and they'll get used to living around the cave, and we can find their eggs up there, chickens and ducks and so on. And, once this catches on, it catches on in a big way. The second of these big inventions, if we understand Cro-Magnon society, and again, I think here we're on safe grounds, this invention probably invented by a woman, or at least it makes sense picturing it this way. Okay, we don't know, but it kind of makes sense if we picture it this way at least. Play along with me. She's a woman, and she's spent a big part, just about every day of her life, walking through the woods or the plains or the grasslands or wherever they happen to be at the time, gathering fruits and nuts and roots and berries and leaves and vegetables and bringing them back to the cave to provide the other half of the family's nutritional needs. The men are out hunting for the protein, the animals, and the women are gathering the carbohydrates and the vegetables and the fruits and so on. And this has been a big part of just about every day of her life. She leaves early in the morning with an empty bag or basket or whatever, and by the end of the day that basket's pretty heavy because it's full of food. And maybe her earliest memories are of walking alongside her mother and her mother teaching her what parts of plants she can eat, what parts of plants she can't eat, which parts are poisonous and which parts are good to eat. And this has been a big part of just about every day of her life. And how far would you have to walk through the woods to find enough fruits and nuts and berries to feed a family? I don't know, but I imagine quite a bit. And, one day she comes back to the cave, and she's carrying that big heavy basket, but it's not full of food, it's full of the darn plants. She's going to plant these plants, she's going to dig a hole in the ground and put these plants in the ground outside the cave and not have to walk through the woods looking for this stuff all the time. And here we've got our second big invention, agriculture. For those of you who are into agriculture, you know what I really mean there is horticulture, but we're going to use the word agriculture. That's the word that traditionally has gotten used here. Beans in the ground, vegetables and fruits being grown, Technically, that's horticulture, but we're going to use the word agriculture here. Domesticated animals and agriculture. These two big inventions. And, well, these inventions change everything. What they change is something that I haven't talked about yet. And that is that all the way back in the Paleolithic period, all the way back in the Paleolithic period, there we go, all the way back in the Old Stone Age, both the Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon people moved around an awful lot. Moving around an awful lot, a whole lot more than you might think. Moving to the north in the summertime and the south in the wintertime, and the opposite in the southern hemisphere. Moving to avoid weather patterns like hurricanes and typhoons, and following migrating game herds. Moving around an awful lot, a lot more than you might think. Rarely spending more than a week or two in the same cave complex before moving on to the next one. Moving around an awful lot. But once you've got these two inventions going on, domesticated animals and agriculture, well, once you've got these going on, well, you can't move around. I guess you can move around when you've got herds of sheep and goats and cattle and chickens and that kind of thing, but it's awfully awkward. But once you've got beans in the ground, once you've got agriculture, then you can't move around. You're stuck in one place. You invested an awful lot of effort, an awful lot of time, an awful lot of labor into clearing the ground of rocks and stumps and that kind of thing. And then once your plants are planted, you've got to stick around. You've got to make sure they get water so they don't dry out. You have to make sure that pests don't get into your crops and eat your food. You have to make sure bad guys don't get your food. You have to make sure that weeds don't grow up and crowd out your plants. And you're stuck in one place. Now, we start to put some things together here, okay? You got people who are stuck in one place because they've got domesticated animals and agriculture. So they're stuck in one place with a much more reliable source of food, because domesticated animals and agriculture are much more reliable sources of food than hunting and gathering. I mean, be honest, would you rather have your steak in your backyard, or would you want to walk through the woods looking for it all the time? I mean, hunting is a great sport, but I'd hate to feed my family that way. Especially with my record as a hunter, I think we'd all be pretty hungry. Yeah, you'd much rather have this more reliable source of food. What this means is that people are going to be healthier. They're going to live longer, but the big player here is children are going to be healthier. Far more children are going to survive infancy because they have better sources of food. Their parents are healthier, more fit to take care of them. And you start putting this together, people living in one place with a more reliable source of food, which means a growing population, one place, growing population, and it's not too long before we see the rise of cities. And this is a process which is going on all over, well, you want to say all over the world, but a big part of the world at least, the growth of cities, where no longer can a cave system provide housing for the people, and they have to invent, I guess, artificial caves or houses to live in. Some of these Neolithic cities are pretty small, yeah, but some of them are pretty big. Some Neolithic cities are pretty large. And around the world, the same process is going on. It's not very long after we find cities that in many parts of the world, not all of them, but in many places where we find cities, then we also see the growth of the development of written languages. And when we have people living in cities, or at least where the city is important to them, and where they have access to a written language, when we find a society where we have these two things going on, where the city is important and where people have at least access to a written language, then we have a type of society that we call a civilization. That word civilization, again, is a word which gets used to mean all kinds of different things in conversation, but it does have a technical meaning in the humanities. When we talk about civilization, we're talking about societies where people live in cities and where they have at least access to a written language. Somebody in town knows how to read and write. Obviously, this concept of civilization is going to be significant to us and important to us. But before we go too far down this road of civilization, I want to back up for just one brief look back to the Paleolithic period, all the way back to the starting point of our conversation here. The first time through, I tried to communicate to you how different the Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon people are, at least in their ways of life and their culture. How different the Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon people are, at least in their ways of life and their culture. But before we leave them entirely, I want to talk about one thing they shared in common. One thing which is kind of strange and odd that they did, that they shared, that their cultures are identical in. And from a lot of perspectives, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense. But they buried their dead. And they buried their dead in a ritual way. What that means is that although the rituals are different in different places and different at different times, if you dig down in the same place at the same time, you'll find that the bodies, both the Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon bodies, are buried in the same way. What I mean by the same way, the same rituals, using the same body posture. Maybe in one place at one time, all the bodies are laying on their backs with their arms at the side. Maybe in another place at another time, all the bodies are lying on the back with the arms crossed across the chest. Or maybe the bodies are curled up in a fetal position at the bottom of the hole, or maybe sitting up at the bottom of the hole, if you kind of picture that, kind of sitting up there. Or maybe all the bodies are buried face down, which always creeps me out. I don't know why, but it does. And then almost universally, the bodies are buried with clothes on, and with a few days' worth of food, and with a knife. And now, none of this really makes an awful lot of sense. I mean, imagine that you're sitting around the dining room table, and Uncle Ugg, who by now is an old man, is telling the story of how he invented the fish hook for like the 3,000th time, and all of a sudden he gets a funny look on his chest, he grabs a hold of his chest, he makes a funny sound, he falls over backwards. You go to him, and the man's dropped dead of a heart attack right there at the dining room table. How terrible. Well, you have to get rid of the body. They figured that one out pretty fast. You have to get rid of the body. But why not just drag Uncle Ugg out in the bushes and throw him out in the woods and throw him in the bushes? The animals will clean him up pretty fast. That's not going to be gross. He's going to be gone pretty fast. You know, if you spent much time in the woods, that you hardly ever find dead animals in the woods. You know, they got to be dying out there somewhere, but they clean up after themselves pretty well. Animals out in the woods, when they die, typically they hide themselves pretty well, and then their friends find them really fast. Or, well, if you don't want to go through the effort of dragging him out in the woods and and throwing him in the bushes, why not eat him? I mean, he's right there at the dining room table. How fresh do you like your steaks? Cut off a slice of butt roast, put it right there on the grill, right there at the dining room table. Well, I mean, I don't say that to gross you out, but it is kind of interesting that we seem to be the only ones around here who are grossed out about that. It doesn't seem to bother anybody else around here. This is one of the best kept secrets in America. So some of you are going to hear this for the first time, but some of you know what I'm talking about here. What does the mama kitty do when one of the baby kitties dies? She eats it. And from her perspective, why shouldn't she? It's free food in the kitty dish, warmed up. From her perspective, why not? Like I said, it's one of the best kept secrets in America. That's why it's always mommy or daddy that looks in the kitty box in the morning, because sometimes there's stuff going on in there you don't want little kids to see. Mama kitty's chowing down on baby back ribs right there in the kitty box. You don't want little kids to see stuff like that. But it doesn't seem to bother anybody else around here. Eating your relatives when they die doesn't seem to bother anybody. But it does bother us, and that's kind of interesting. Well, even if you don't want to eat him, why go through the effort of, first of all, digging a hole? Digging a grave-sized hole is hard work in Florida, where all you're doing is moving sand. And going through the effort of making sure the body's in the right posture, and at least take the clothes off the guy. Clothes are incredibly expensive. If we think, and for these people, if we think about the value of a product as the amount of labor that goes into creating the product, clothes are terribly expensive. You've got to take the leather skins or whatever and poke holes with a little pointy rock knife and tie it all together with leather strings. It takes an awful lot of work. And food, I mean, the only thing I can think of dumber than burying a bunch of food is burying a bunch of food with a dead guy. What's that going to do? And a knife, man, those knives are terribly expensive. What if one of your projects this semester was to make a stone knife? I gave everybody 2 rocks and said, turn one of these into a knife. That's an awful lot of work. At least take the clothes off the guy. Don't bury the food. Knives. Why are you burying a knife with a dead guy? So although these rituals don't make an awful lot of sense, I'm glad they did, because I think they indicate some things to us. Well, first of all, the fact that oftentimes Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon people share the same burial rituals is all the evidence we need that they are communicating with each other, that they're sharing information in some way, because they share the rituals. They have the rituals in common. They know about each other. They interact with each other. It's not like one group lives in one mountain valley and the other lives in the other mountain valley. It's just 2 different approaches to life, okay? The Neanderthal people, they're satisfied with getting by. The Cro-Magnon people, they want more than getting by, okay? They want more for themselves. They want more for their kids. And they know that if you want more than just getting by, then, well, you got to try new stuff, because all you've been doing is just getting by. The old stuff's just been getting you by. But they're 2 different approaches to life, but obviously they're interacting with each other, okay? Also, I think it indicates something else about these people. And that is, I think, that it indicates a belief in an afterlife. Because then all of a sudden it would kind of make sense why you would bury your uncle with clothes on. I mean, how embarrassing would that be? Show up in the afterlife and get arrested for public nudity right off the bat. And food, well, of course you want your uncle to have a couple days worth of food until he can figure out how things work wherever he ends up. And a knife, well, you can always use a good knife. And that somehow, by burying your uncle with clothes on and food and a knife, that somehow you're expressing a hope that in the afterlife your uncle will be protected and be able to defend himself and be provided for and that kind of thing. I think that would make sense. Yeah, I think that would start to make sense. And if we define religion as a belief in something other than this physical universe that you and I live in, this physical universe that we experience with our bodies, that we taste, touch, see, smell, and hear, that we experience with our 5 senses, that there's something else outside this physical universe. And especially if we have rituals associated with that belief, then I think it's fair to say that there's some evidence of religion as well. And then I'm also glad they did it because it tells us something else about these people. I mean, why don't you drag your uncle in the woods and throw him in the bushes? Because he's your uncle, for crying out loud. You treat the man with some respect and some dignity. You even treat his body with some respect. Because he's your uncle. You love the man. Yeah, sure, it was annoying the 3,000th time he talked about inventing the fish hook, but hey, he's the guy who taught you how to fish. And you treat the man with some respect and some dignity. And the thought of throwing him in the bushes and having wild animals eat him just disgusts you. And certainly the idea of eating him yourself just turns your stomach. That's utterly disrespectful. And to show some respect to the man because you love the man. And I think that this show of respect and dignity and love tells us an awful lot about these people who, even though they couldn't write down their story for us, do have some things to say to us.